In the glittering Grand Lyceum Theater, a scream shatters the anticipation of La Traviata's opening night. The star soprano, Clara Voss, lies dead, strangled by a silk scarf in her dressing room. Enter Miss Jane Marple, a sharp-eyed spinster from St. Mary Mead, who sees what others miss: a pale powder smudge, a bruised red rose, a sailor's knot tied with chilling precision. As whispers of ambition, envy, and obsession swirl among the director, understudy, costume designer, and a devoted fan, Miss Marple unravels a web of secrets. Only one truth emerges: a desperate dream to steal the spotlight at the cost of a life. Chapter 1. The Silent Aria. The Grand Lyceum. Theater stood resplendent under the London gaslights, its marble facade gleaming with an elegance that promised enchantment within. Inside, the air thrummed with the anticipation of a sold-out performance of La Traviata. The audience, a glittering assembly of fur stoles and top hats, murmured in their seats, their programs rustling like autumn leaves. In a modest box to the left of the stage, Miss Jane Marple sat, her slight figure almost lost in the plush velvet chair. Her gray hair was neatly pinned beneath a simple hat, and her hands, delicate yet purposeful, worked a pair of knitting needles, the soft click-clack blending with the orchestra's tuning notes. She was not a frequent patron of the opera, preferring the quiet rhythms of St. Mary Mead, but her dear friend Lady Beatrice Harwood had insisted she attend. "There's something amiss in the company, Jane," Beatrice had confided over tea the previous day, her brow furrowed. "I can't put my finger on it, but I'd value your eyes." Miss Marple's eyes, sharp and bright despite her years, missed little. She noted the usher's hurried whispers, the slight delay in the curtain's rise, and the faint unease in Beatrice's posture beside her. "It's a splendid theater," Miss Marple remarked, her voice mild, but her gaze sweeping the auditorium. "But splendor often hides shadows." Beatrice nodded, her gloved hands twisting her fan. Before she could reply, a piercing scream cut through the theater's hum, sharp as a shard of glass. The orchestra faltered, a violin string squealing into silence. Murmurs swelled to gasps as a stagehand burst through the crimson curtains, his face ashen. "She's dead," he cried. "Madame Voss, murdered." The auditorium erupted in chaos. Ladies clutched their pearls, gentlemen rose, shouting for order. Miss Marple's needles paused, her lips pursing slightly. "Dear me," she said softly, folding her knitting into her reticule. "This is most unfortunate." Beatrice, pale but composed, leaned closer. "Jane, you must see what's happened. You've a knack for these things." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly, though her expression remained grave. "I shall do what I can," she murmured, rising with a sprightliness that belied her age. Backstage was a labyrinth of ropes, props, and flickering gas lamps. The air smelled of grease paint and roses, undercut by a faint metallic tang. Miss Marple navigated the chaos with quiet purpose, her small frame slipping past frantic stagehands and weeping chorus girls. Inspector Craddock, a tall man with a weary but kind face, was already there, his notebook open. He caught sight of her and sighed, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Miss Marple, I might have known. You've a nose for trouble." She inclined her head, unruffled. "Merely an observer, Inspector, but I do find human nature illuminating." The dressing room of Madame Clara Voss was a shrine to opulence, its walls draped in crimson silk, a gilded mirror dominating one side. Clara herself lay slumped before it, her once vibrant beauty frozen in death. Her emerald gown, meant for Violetta's tragic role, shimmered under the gaslight, but a silk scarf, deep indigo, embroidered with silver thread, encircled her throat, tied with chilling precision. The room bore signs of disarray. A crystal perfume bottle lay shattered, its contents pooling on the floor. A seam on Clara's gown was torn, as if caught in a struggle, and a single rose, its petals bruised, rested near her hand. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the scarf, its knot intricate, almost ornamental. "A sailor's hitch, perhaps," she murmured, too low for Craddock to hear. "Not the work of a hasty hand." Craddock knelt beside the body, his expression grim. "Strangled, no doubt about it. The scarf's a prop from the opera, used in the second act. She was alive an hour ago, seen by half the troupe." He glanced at Miss Marple, who stood quietly, her hands clasped. "Any thoughts, Miss Marple? You've a way of seeing what we miss." She smiled faintly, her eyes scanning the room. "Only that murder, Inspector, is rarely as simple as it seems. This scarf, for instance. Why choose it? It's distinctive, deliberate." She stepped closer, noting a smudge of powder on the mirror's edge, a shade too pale for Clara's complexion. "And this room," she added, "tells a story of its own, but we must listen carefully to hear it." As Craddock's men cordoned off the scene, Miss Marple retreated to the corridor, where the troupe's whispers buzzed like flies. She overheard a stagehand mention the director's temper, another speak of the understudy's ambition, and a seamstress hint at the costume designer's grudges. A fan, lingering too long backstage, was also named. Miss Marple's mind, sharp as her needles, began to weave these threads together. Human nature, she thought, is the same in St. Mary Mead or a grand theater. And someone, tonight, let it unravel. With a final glance at the dressing room, she resolved to observe more closely, certain that the truth lay not in the grandeur of the Lyceum, but in the quiet details only she could see. Chapter 2. The Scene of the Crime. The backstage of the Grand Lyceum. Theater was a world unto itself, a dimly lit maze of narrow corridors, creaking floorboards, and the faint hum of gas lamps casting long, wavering shadows. Miss Jane Marple moved through it with the quiet assurance of one. Accustomed to navigating the complexities of human nature, her small, neat figure, almost invisible amid the flurry of stagehands, weeping sopranos, and harried policemen. The air was thick with the mingled scents of sawdust, grease paint, and something sharper. Fear, perhaps, or the lingering trace of tragedy. Inspector Craddock had granted her access, albeit with a raised eyebrow and a muttered, "You'll be the death of me yet, Miss Marple." She merely smiled, her knitting tucked away, her eyes bright and alert behind her spectacles. Murder, she knew, was a puzzle, and the pieces were scattered here, waiting to be gathered. The dressing room of Madame Clara Voss was a study in opulence, its crimson silk walls glowing under the flickering gaslight, a stark contrast to the grim scene at its heart. Clara lay slumped before her gilded mirror, her emerald gown pooling around her like spilled ink, her face frozen in a silent scream. The silk scarf, indigo threaded with silver, a prop from La Traviata's second act, was knotted tightly around her throat, its intricate loops a chilling testament to intent. Miss Marple paused at the threshold, her gaze sweeping the room with the precision of a seamstress measuring cloth. The chaos was subtle but telling. A crystal perfume bottle lay shattered on the floor, its amber liquid seeping into the rug. A seam on Clara's gown was ripped, the stitches frayed as if tugged in haste. A single rose, its petals bruised, rested near her outstretched hand, its stem snapped. A velvet chair was slightly askew, and a powder puff, dusted with a shade too pale for Clara's warm complexion, sat abandoned on the dressing table. Inspector Craddock stood near the body, his notebook open, his face set in a familiar blend of determination and exasperation. "Strangled, no question," he said, glancing at Miss Marple. "The scarf's tight as a noose, tied with a knot I've not seen before, almost decorative, like something a sailor might use." He gestured to a young constable who was carefully sketching the scene. "We've got an hour's window. Clara was seen alive at 6, laughing with the chorus girls. By 7, when the stagehand found her, she was gone. The whole troupe was milling about backstage. No one's got a solid alibi yet." Miss Marple nodded, stepping closer, her sensible shoes silent on the thick rug. "A sailor's knot, you say?" Her voice was mild, but her eyes lingered on the scarf, its silver threads catching the light. "It's a curious choice, Inspector. A prop, you said, meant for the stage, yet used for murder. That suggests forethought, doesn't it? Not a sudden impulse." She bent slightly, careful not to disturb the scene, and studied the knot. It was a double hitch, precise and unyielding, the kind that held fast under strain. "Whoever tied this knew their craft," she murmured. "Not a clumsy hand, nor a panicked one." Craddock scratched his jaw, his eyes narrowing. "You're thinking it's someone in the troupe? They'd know the props, the layout backstage." He waved a hand at the room. "This place is a mess, but it's not a brawl. No overturned furniture, no scratches on her arms. She didn't fight much, if at all." He pointed to the shattered perfume bottle. "That's the only real disorder. Smells like jasmine. Strong stuff. Maybe she dropped it in surprise." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. "Or someone else dropped it," she said softly. She moved to the dressing table, her fingers hovering over the powder puff. The powder was a pale ivory, unlike the rosy hue Clara's skin demanded. "This isn't hers," she said, almost to herself. Madame Voss was known for her dramatic makeup, warm tones, bold lines. This shade is too light, more suited to someone fairer. She glanced at Craddock, who jotted a note. "And the rose," she continued, her eyes on the bruised flower. "It's not from her bouquet. Those are all white, over there." She nodded toward a vase of pristine roses in the corner, untouched by the chaos. "This one's red and damaged. A gift, perhaps, or a clue." Craddock followed her gaze, his brow furrowing. "You see more than most, Miss Marple. Always have." He turned to a constable. "Bag the powder puff and the rose, and get me a list of everyone who was backstage between 6 and 7. He looked back at Miss Marple, half expecting her to take charge. "Any other thoughts?" She smiled faintly, her hands clasped. "Only that murder, Inspector, is a performance in itself. The killer chose this stage, this moment. We must ask why." She stepped back, her eyes scanning the room once more. The torn seam on Clara's gown caught her attention again. It was a small tear near the shoulder, as if someone had gripped the fabric tightly. She was caught by surprise, Miss Marple said, but not entirely unprepared. She turned, perhaps, or reached out. The scarf was already around her neck, part of her costume, maybe, adjusted by someone she trusted. Craddock nodded, his mind racing. The scarf's a prop, so anyone in the troupe could have handled it. The director, Signor Ricci, was in a foul mood today. Had a row with Clara over the staging. The understudy, Evelyn Trent, was hovering about, probably itching for a chance to sing Violetta. Then there's the costume designer, Madame Fournier, who fitted Clara's gown. And some odd fellow, a fan, kept trying to get backstage, Harold something or other. He sighed. Too many suspects, not enough time. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained grave. Time, Inspector, is less important than observation. In my village, you see, we have a postmistress who notices everything, who comes, who goes, who lingers too long. Backstage is not so different. Someone saw something, even if they don't yet know it. She turned toward the door, where a small crowd of performers had gathered, their faces pale, their whispers sharp. Might I speak with the stage manager? He would know who was where. Craddock signaled to a burly man in a worn waistcoat, who approached with a harried look. "Mr. Grayson," Craddock said, "this is Miss Marple, assisting us. Tell her about the hour before the body was found." Grayson, his forehead slick with sweat, nodded. "It was madness, as usual," he said, his voice gruff. "Clara was in her dressing room by 6, getting ready. Signor Ricci stormed in and out, shouting about her entrance. Miss Trent was there, too, helping with the costume. Said she wanted to learn the role better. Madame Fournier was fussing over the gown, muttering about Clara's alterations. And that fan, Mr. Blake, kept pestering me for a pass to see Clara. I sent him packing, but he was lurking near the stage door." Miss Marple listened, her head tilted slightly, as if hearing a faint melody others missed. "And the scarf?" she asked. "When was it brought to Madame Voss?" Grayson frowned, rubbing his chin. "Madame Fournier brought it, I think. Said it was for the second act, to match the gown. Clara didn't like it, said it was too heavy, but Fournier insisted." Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away the detail. "And did you see anyone else near her door?" Grayson hesitated. "Miss Trent was there, just before 7. Looked nervous, but she's always like that before a show. Said she was checking on Clara." "Thank you, Mr. Grayson," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle but firm. As he shuffled away, she turned to Craddock. "The scarf is our thread, Inspector. It was part of the costume, yet it became a weapon. Someone chose it deliberately, someone who knew it would be there and how to use it." She glanced at the dressing room door, where a young constable stood guard. "Might I take another look? Sometimes the smallest things speak the loudest." Craddock waved her in, and she stepped back into the room, her eyes darting to the corners others overlooked. The mirror, tall and ornate, reflected the scene in reverse, and Miss Marple paused before it, noting a faint smudge on its edge. Not powder, but something waxy, like lipstick. It was a deep crimson, matching Clara's signature shade, but it was smeared, as if brushed by a sleeve or a glove. "She was facing the mirror?" Miss Marple murmured. She saw her attacker, perhaps, or turned at the last moment. She bent to examine the rug, where the perfume's amber stain had spread. A tiny shard of glass glinted, half hidden by the rug's fringe. She pointed it out to Craddock. "This bottle didn't just fall. It was knocked over, perhaps in a struggle, but a brief one." Craddock knelt, peering at the shard. "You're saying she knew her killer? Let them close enough to tie that scarf?" Miss Marple's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "People trust those they know, Inspector. In my village, we had a gardener who let a thief into his shed because he recognized the face. Familiarity is a dangerous thing." She straightened, her eyes on the rose again. Its red petals were vivid against the rug's muted tones, its stem bent at an unnatural angle. "This rose bothers me," she said. "It's not from her bouquet, and it's not a prop. Someone brought it here, and recently." Craddock jotted another note, his patience tempered by respect. "You're building a picture, Miss Marple, but it's a blurry one. We've got 4 suspects, all with reasons to dislike Clara. Ricci's temper, Trent's ambition, Fournier's pride, Blake's obsession. Any of them could have slipped in, tied that scarf, and slipped out." He gestured to the corridor, where the troops' voices grew louder, tinged with panic. "The press is sniffing around already. We need answers before this turns into a circus." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene, but her mind racing. She thought of Saint, Mary Mead, of the village fete where a jealous seamstress had sabotaged a rival's dress with a single, deliberate cut. The tear in Clara's gown was similar, not random, but precise, as if meant to distract or delay. "The killer wanted time," she said softly. "Time to act, time to escape. This room, Inspector, is a stage, and the murder was rehearsed." She turned to the door where a chorus girl hovered, her eyes red from crying. Miss Marple called gently. "Did Madame Voss have any visitors this evening, before the tragedy?" The girl, barely 20, sniffled and nodded. "Only the usual. Signor Ricci, Miss Trent, Madame Fournier. Oh, and that strange man, Mr. Blake, tried to give her a rose, but I don't think she took it. She was in a mood, said she didn't want visitors." Miss Marple thanked her, her mind turning over the new piece. A rose offered, rejected, yet here it lay, broken. Curious, she thought, how gifts can become accusations. As Craddock began questioning the chorus girl, Miss Marple stepped into the corridor, her eyes scanning the faces of the troupe. Signor Ricci was arguing with a stagehand, his gestures wild. Evelyn Trent stood alone, her hands clasped tightly. Madame Fournier was barking orders at a seamstress, her voice sharp, and Harold Blake, the fan, lingered near the stage door, his eyes darting nervously. Each was a thread in the tapestry, and Miss Marple knew that one, carefully pulled, would unravel the truth. She returned to Craddock, who was now examining the scarf, sealed in a paper bag. "We'll have it tested for prints," he said, "though I doubt we'll find much. Too many hands touch these props." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her voice soft as a whisper. "But hands leave traces, Inspector, even when they think they don't. A smudge, a tear, a rose. These are the language of murder." She glanced at the dressing room one last time, her mind already piecing together the puzzle. The scarf, the knot, the powder, the rose. They were clues, yes, but also a story, one of envy, ambition, or obsession. And Miss Marple, with her quiet village wisdom, was determined to read it to its end. Chapter 3. The suspects emerge. The Grand Lyceum. Theater, its stage now silent, seemed to hold its breath as the weight of murder settled over it. The corridor outside Clara Voss's dressing room buzzed with nervous energy, a hive of whispers and sidelong glances among the troupe. Miss Jane Marple stood to one side, her small frame half hidden in the shadow of a velvet curtain, her eyes as sharp as the pins in her reticule. Her hands, though idle without her knitting, were clasped lightly, betraying none of the keen observation that catalogued every gesture, every flicker of expression. Inspector Craddock, his notebook now creased from use, was issuing orders to his constables, his voice a low rumble amid the chaos. "Round them up," he said. "The director, the understudy, the costume designer, and that fan. I want statements from each, and no one leaves until we're through." Miss Marple watched as the four figures were ushered into a small rehearsal room, its walls lined with faded posters of past triumphs. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of old wood and dust, and a single gas lamp cast a fitful glow. She followed quietly, her presence barely noted, as if she were merely a kindly aunt come to offer tea and sympathy. Yet her mind was anything but idle, sifting through the details of the dressing room, the scarf's precise knot, the pale powder, the bruised red rose, and weaving them into a pattern only she could yet discern. Murder, she thought, is like a village quarrel, only dressed in finer clothes. The motives are the same: jealousy, greed, fear. We shall see who wears them here. Craddock stood at the head of the room, his broad shoulders squared, his gaze sweeping over the four suspects. Madame Voss was strangled between 6 and 7 this evening, he began, his tone clipped. Each of you was backstage. Each of you had access to her dressing room. I'll have your accounts, one by one, and I'll know if you're hiding anything. He glanced at Miss Marple, a silent acknowledgement of her uncanny knack for seeing through lies. She inclined her head, her expression mild, but her eyes missed nothing. The way Signor Antonio Ricci's fingers drummed on his knee, the faint tremor in Evelyn Trent's clasped hands, the tight line of Madame Louise Fournier's mouth, the nervous fidgeting of Harold Blake's cheap tie. First was Signor Ricci, the director, a man whose commanding presence filled the room like a crescendo. His dark hair was streaked with silver, his eyes flashing with a passion that bordered on volatility. He rose, his tailored coat creased from pacing, and spoke with a thick Italian accent, his hands gesturing as if conducting an unseen orchestra. "This is a tragedy, a catastrophe," he declared. "Clara was my star, my Violetta, the heart of La Traviata. Who would dare harm her?" His voice cracked, but Miss Marple noted the theatricality of it, as if he were playing to an audience. "I was in my office, preparing notes until 6:30. Then I checked the stage lighting. I saw Clara at 6, yes, but only to discuss her entrance. She was difficult, always demanding changes, but I left her alive, I swear it." Miss Marple tilted her head, her gaze lingering on Ricci's hands, which bore faint ink stains, as if he'd been scribbling furiously. "Your scarf, Signor Ricci," she said softly, her voice cutting through his bluster. "The one used in the crime. It was yours, was it not?" Ricci's eyes widened, a flush creeping up his neck. "See, it was mine," he admitted. "A gift from Milan, lent to Clara for her costume, but I gave it to Madame Fournier days ago. I had no hand in this." His indignation seemed genuine, yet Miss Marple recalled the cigar smoke she'd smelled in his office, a scent absent in the dressing room. A man of fire, she thought, but fire can mask calculation. Next was Evelyn Trent, the understudy, a slender young woman with a face that might have been beautiful, but for the hunger in her eyes. Her auburn hair was pinned tightly, her gray dress plain but immaculate, as if she'd dressed to avoid notice. She sat rigidly, her voice low but steady. "I admired Clara," she said, her words measured. "She was brilliant, a genius. I only wanted to learn from her." Yet her fingers twisted a handkerchief, betraying a tension her face concealed. "I was in my dressing room, practicing my scales, until 6:40. Then I went to Clara's room to ask about a cue. She was alive, brushing her hair. I left her to finish dressing." Her eyes flicked to Craddock, then away, avoiding Miss Marple's steady gaze. "You hoped to sing tonight, didn't you, Miss Trent?" Miss Marple asked, her tone as gentle as a village vicar's. Evelyn's cheeks flushed faintly. "Every understudy hopes for a chance," she said, "but not like this." I'd never harm her. Miss Marple noted the precision of Evelyn's appearance, her nails trimmed, her hair flawless, and thought of a girl in St. Mary Mead who'd once polished her shoes to a mirror shine before stealing a rival's beau. Ambition, she mused, is a quiet poison, but it leaves traces. Madame Louise Fournier was next, a wiry woman with a sharp face and a French accent that cut like a tailor's shears. Her hands, calloused from years of needlework, gripped the arms of her chair. Clara Voss was impossible, she said bluntly, her eyes flashing. Always changing my designs, tearing seams, demanding new costumes. But murder? None, I am no killer. She claimed to have been in her workshop, adjusting a chorus girl's hem, from 6 to 7. I saw Clara at 6:15, fitting her gown. That scarf, my idea, to complement the emerald silk. I tied it loosely, nothing more. Her voice was firm, but Miss Marple noticed a faint tremor in her fingers, as if they longed for a needle to steady them. Pride, she thought, can sting as sharply as envy. Last was Harold Blake, the fan, a man in his 40s with a sallow face and a worn suit that spoke of better days. He clutched a crumpled program, its edges frayed from nervous handling. I loved Clara's voice, he said, his voice trembling. She was an angel, a goddess. I only wanted to see her, to give her a rose. He admitted to lingering backstage, begging the stage manager for access. I was near the stage door at 6:30, but they wouldn't let me in. I heard Clara singing, practicing her aria. I'd never heard her, never. His eyes brimmed with tears, but Miss Marple noted his restless hands, the way they tugged at his tie, as if it choked him. Devotion, she thought, can twist into something darker. Craddock dismissed them, his notebook filled with contradictory accounts. He turned to Miss Marple, his brow furrowed. They all had means and opportunity, he said. The scarf was backstage, accessible to anyone. Ricci's temper, Trent's ambition, Fournier's resentment, Blake's obsession, any could have done it, but we've no hard evidence yet. He rubbed his temples, the weight of the case settling on him. What's your take, Miss Marple? You've a way of seeing through the fog. She smiled faintly, her hands still clasped. People are like books, Inspector. You must read between the lines. Signor Ricci's passion is loud, but is it deep? Miss Trent's calm is too perfect, like a mask. Madame Fournier's pride is a shield, but what does it protect? And Mr. Blake? His love may be true, but love can blind as well as bind. She paused, her eyes distant, as if seeing her village green. In St. Mary Mead, we had a baker who swore he loved his wife, yet poisoned her tarts to be free. Motives are never simple, but they always show themselves, in a glance, a word, a silence. Craddock nodded, accustomed to her cryptic wisdom. I'll have my men check their alibis, search their rooms. That scarf's knot is our best lead. Someone knew how to tie it. He hesitated, then added, You'll stay on, won't you? This lot's slippery, and I'd wager you'll spot something we miss. Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression serene. I shall observe, Inspector. The theater is a stage, after all, and someone has played their part too well. As the suspects dispersed, Miss Marple lingered in the rehearsal room, her eyes on the posters, their faded ink a reminder of fleeting glory. She thought of the scarf, its silver threads gleaming in her mind, and the rose, its red petals a silent accusation. Someone wanted Clara gone, she murmured, but not just gone, silenced, in a way that spoke. The scarf was no accident, nor the knot. She stepped into the corridor where the troop's whispers had faded to a hush, and knew the truth lay not in their words, but in the shadows they cast. With a quiet resolve, she followed Craddock back to the dressing room, ready to unravel the next thread in the tapestry of murder. Chapter 4. The Director's Temper. The Grand Lyceum. Theater, though stilled by the tragedy of Madame Clara Voss's murder, seemed to pulse with a restless energy as Miss Jane Marple made her way to Signor Antonio Ricci's office. The corridor was a warren of narrow passages, lined with faded playbills and the faint scent of turpentine from freshly painted sets. Her steps were soft, her sensible shoes whispering against the worn floorboards, but her mind was as sharp as ever, turning over the details of the crime like a seamstress examining a flawed stitch. The indigo scarf, its sailor's knot tied with chilling precision, the pale powder smudged on the mirror, the bruised red rose, all were threads in a pattern she was beginning to discern. Now she sought to test the first suspect, Signor Ricci, whose fiery temper had been whispered about by stagehands and chorus girls alike. The office door stood ajar, revealing a cluttered space that mirrored its occupant's volatile nature. Piles of sheet music teetered on a mahogany desk, a half-smoked cigar rested in an ashtray, and a crumpled script bore the marks of a frustrated hand. Signor Ricci stood by a narrow window, his broad shoulders hunched, his dark eyes fixed on the rain-slicked street below. His tailored coat was flung over a chair, and his cravat was loosened, as if the room itself constrained him. At Miss Marple's gentle knock, he turned sharply, his face a storm of irritation and grief. "Who is it now?" he snapped, then softened slightly at the sight of her unassuming figure. "Ah, the lady with the questions. Inspector Craddock's friend, see?" "Miss Marple," she said, her voice mild as she stepped inside, her eyes taking in every detail. The ink-stained blotter, the faint whiff of cigar smoke, the photograph of a younger Clara Voss pinned to the wall, her smile radiant. "I hope I'm not intruding, Signor Ricci. I only wish to understand a little more about Madame Voss and this dreadful evening." Ricci's hands gestured wildly, as if conducting an unseen aria. "Understand? There is nothing to understand. Clara was my star, my muse, the soul of this production, and now—" His voice broke, and he sank into a chair, rubbing his temples. "She was difficult, yes, always demanding. New costumes, new blocking, new everything. This morning, we argued over her entrance in Act 1. She wanted a grander flourish, more lights. I told her it was impossible, the budget is strained, the stagehands overworked. She called me a tyrant." He laughed bitterly, then caught himself, his eyes narrowing. "But I did not kill her. I was in this office, writing notes until the scream came." Miss Marple nodded, settling into a chair opposite him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "A passionate disagreement, then," she said, her tone as gentle as a village gossip sharing news over tea. "It must be trying, managing such a spirited company." Her eyes lingered on his hands, which trembled slightly, the knuckles white as he gripped the desk. "Your scarf, Signor Ricci, the one used in the crime. You said it was yours, lent to Clara for her costume. When did you last see it?" Ricci's flush deepened, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm. "Days ago," he said, his accent thickening. "I gave it to Madame Fournier for the costume design. It was perfect for Violetta's scene, the indigo against the emerald gown. Clara complained it was heavy, but she wore it for rehearsals. I had no need to touch it after that." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "You think I would use my own scarf to kill her? Madness! I am a director, not a murderer." Miss Marple's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Of course," she said soothingly, though her mind noted the cigar smoke, distinct from the jasmine perfume in Clara's dressing room. "You were here, you say, writing notes. Did anyone visit you, or did you hear anything unusual before the scream?" She glanced at the desk, where a fountain pen lay uncapped, its ink still wet, suggesting recent use. A half-written letter, its words too small to read, peeked from beneath a pile of papers. Ricci hesitated, his eyes darting to the photograph of Clara. "No visitors," he said firmly. "I was alone, working. The walls are thick, but I heard the usual chaos, stagehands, singers, the clatter of props. Nothing stood out until that scream." He shuddered, his passion giving way to a flicker of fear. It was like the cry of a dying bird, sharp and terrible. I ran to her room, but it was too late. Miss Marple's eyes softened, though her thoughts were far from sentimental. She recalled a saint. Mary Mead grocer, quick to shout at his apprentices but pale when accused of tampering with the scales. Passion could be a mask, she knew, but Ricci's shock at the scarf's use had seemed genuine. "You cared for Madame Voss," she said, her voice gentle but probing. "Not just as a director, perhaps?" Ricci's face tightened, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "She was my star," he repeated, but the words carried a weight beyond the professional. "I admired her talent, her fire, but she was not mine to love, if that's what you mean. My heart is in my work, not in foolish affairs." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window again. "You ask too many questions, Signorina. The police should find the killer, not an old lady with a curious mind." Miss Marple smiled, unruffled. "An old lady sees much, Signor Ricci. In my village, we notice the small things, a glance, a hesitation, a lie that doesn't quite fit." She rose, her movements deliberate, and paused at the door. "One last thing. The scarf's knot. It was a sailor's hitch, quite distinctive. Have you ever sailed, or perhaps learned such knots for a production?" Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp as needles. Ricci froze, his back to her. "Sailing? No, I am no man of the sea. As for knots, I direct operas, not ships. Perhaps a stagehand tied it. Those men know all sorts of tricks." His voice was dismissive, but Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in his shoulders, the way his hand clenched the window frame. "Thank you, Signor Ricci," she said, stepping into the corridor. "You've been most helpful." As she closed the door, Miss Marple's mind turned over the encounter like a page in a well-read book. Ricci's temper was real, his grief perhaps genuine, but his story was too neat, his denials too quick. The cigar smoke, absent from the dressing room, suggested he hadn't been near Clara at the critical moment, yet his scarf tied the knot that killed her. A director knows how to stage a scene, she thought, and this murder was staged with care. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead Carpenter, loud and blustering, who'd hidden a stolen watch in his shed, thinking no one would look twice. Ricci's office, with its clutter and secrets, might hold similar surprises. She made her way back to the rehearsal room, where Inspector Craddock was reviewing statements, his face lined with fatigue. "Well, Miss Marple?" he asked, looking up. "What do you make of our fiery Italian?" She settled beside him, her hands clasped. "Signor Ricci is a man of passion, Inspector, but passion can be a curtain as well as a flame. He admits to the scarf, but not to the knot. I wonder if he knows more than he says. or less. She paused, her eyes distant. We must look at the others, but the scarf remains our guide. It was his, yet someone else used it. That choice was deliberate, meant to point a finger. Craddock nodded, jotting a note. I've got men searching his office and the others' rooms. If there's anything, another scarf, a matching knot, even that rose you keep mentioning, we'll find it. He glanced at her, a wry smile tugging at his lips. You're building a case, aren't you? Piece by piece, like one of your knitting patterns. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained grave. Patterns, Inspector, are what solve murders. In St. Mary Mead, a woman once poisoned her rival's tea because she wanted her place in the choir. The signs were there, a bitter word, a stolen glance. Here, the signs are in the scarf, the powder, the rose. We need only follow them. She rose, her mind already turning to Evelyn, Trent, the understudy, whose quiet ambition might hide a sharper edge. As she stepped into the corridor, the theater's shadows seemed to deepen, whispering of secrets yet to be unveiled. Chapter 5. The Understudy's Ambition. The corridors of the Grand Lyceum Theater, though steeped in the grandeur of its velvet drapes and gilded frames, carried a chill that seemed to linger in the wake of Clara Voss's murder. Miss Jane Marple moved through them with her usual unhurried grace, her small figure dwarfed by the towering flats and coiled ropes of the backstage world. Her eyes, bright behind her spectacles, missed nothing: the nervous glances of a stagehand, the muffled sobs of a chorus girl, the faint creak of a door left ajar. She had just left Signor Ricci's office, his fiery denials and trembling hands fresh in her mind, and now turned her attention to Evelyn Trent, the understudy, whose quiet presence belied a hunger Miss Marple had seen before in the ambitious hearts of St. Mary Mead. Evelyn's dressing room was a stark contrast to Clara's opulent sanctuary. Tucked at the end of a dimly lit passage, it was a cramped utilitarian space, its walls bare save for a cracked mirror and a single photograph of Evelyn in a minor role, her smile taut with effort. A narrow table held a few essentials: a hairbrush, a tin of throat lozenges, a dog-eared score of La Traviata, and a single chair sat askew, as if its occupant had risen in haste. Evelyn herself stood by a small window, her auburn hair pinned with meticulous care, her gray dress pressed to perfection. She turned as Miss Marple entered, her green eyes wary but composed, like a cat watching an approaching stranger. "Miss Trent?" Miss Marple said, her voice as gentle as a village nurse tending a bruise. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I only wish to speak about poor Madame Voss and this terrible evening." She settled into the chair, her hands folded neatly, her expression one of kindly concern. But her mind was sharp, sifting through the clues: the indigo scarf's precise knot, the pale powder on Clara's mirror, the bruised red rose, and weighing them against Evelyn's poised demeanor. Evelyn nodded, her fingers smoothing her dress, a gesture so deliberate it seemed rehearsed. "It's dreadful," she said, her voice low and steady. Clara was extraordinary. Her voice, her presence, she was Violetta in every way. I can't believe anyone would do this. Her words were earnest, but Miss Marple noted a faint strain in her tone, as if each syllable were chosen with care. "I was in here, practicing, until just before 7. I went to Clara's room to ask about a cue for Act 2. She was at her mirror, brushing her hair. I didn't stay long." Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes soft but probing. "You must have worked hard to be her understudy, my dear. It's no small thing to step into such a role." Her tone was warm, inviting confidence, as she had once. Coaxed a confession from a St. Mary Mead shop girl who'd pilfered ribbons to impress a suitor. Did you ever hope to sing Violetta yourself, perhaps tonight? Evelyn's cheeks flushed, a faint pink against her pale skin, but her gaze held steady. Every understudy dreams of performing, she said, her voice tightening. I studied Clara's every move, her phrasing, her gestures, but I didn't want it this way. I'd never harm her. She was my teacher in a way. Her hands clasped the back of the chair, her knuckles whitening. Miss Marple noted the precision of her appearance, her hair pinned without a strand out of place, her nails trimmed to a faultless curve, and thought of a village seamstress who'd sewn her rival's dress too tightly out of envy. You were in her dressing room, you say, Miss Marple continued, her voice as soft as a whisper. Did you notice the scarf she wore? The indigo one, with silver threads. Evelyn's eyes flickered, a brief shadow crossing her face. I saw it, she said. It was part of her costume, draped over her shoulders. Madame Fournier had tied it, I think. Clara didn't like it, said it was too heavy for her scene. She hesitated, then added, I didn't touch it. I was only there a moment. Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over the detail. The scarf, Signor Ricci's gift, had been tied by Madame Fournier, yet ended in a sailor's hitch, a knot neither claimed to know. And the rose, she said, almost casually. The red one on the floor. Did you see it? Evelyn's fingers twitched, a fleeting movement. A rose? I don't recall. Clara had so many flowers. Her admirers were always sending them. Her voice was smooth, but Miss Marple caught the slight pause, the way her eyes darted to the mirror, as if seeking her own reflection for reassurance. You must know the stage well, Miss Marple said, shifting tack. The props, the costumes, the little tricks of the trade. Have you ever worked with ropes or knots, perhaps for a set change? Her tone was light, but her eyes were keen, watching Evelyn's face. The understudy's lips parted, then closed, her composure faltering for a fraction of a second. Knots? No, that's the stagehand's work. I focus on the music, the role. She straightened, her voice firm. I'm a singer, Miss Marple, not a sailor. Of course, Miss Marple said, her smile gentle but unwavering. Yet the theater is full of skills, isn't it? Like my village, where everyone knows a little of everyone else's trade. Our baker once learned to mend nets to court a fisherman's daughter. She rose, her movements slow, deliberate. You were close to Clara, weren't you? As her understudy, you must have watched her every day, learned her habits. Evelyn nodded, her expression guarded. I had to, she said. It's my job to be ready. Miss Marple paused at the door, her hand on the knob. One last thing, Miss Trent. The powder on Clara's mirror. It was pale, not her shade. Did you ever use such a powder? Evelyn's eyes widened, a flicker of alarm quickly masked. Powder? I use my own here. She gestured to the table, where a small compact held a similar ivory shade. Clara's was always bolder. I don't know why hers would be different. Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away the compact's presence, its shade matching the smudge in Clara's room. As she stepped into the corridor, Miss Marple's thoughts churned like the wheels of a well-oiled cart. Evelyn's composure was a polished surface, but beneath it lay cracks. Her hesitation about the rose, her quick denial of the knot, the powder that linked her to the crime scene. Ambition, Miss Marple mused, is a quiet fire, but it burns fiercely. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead girl who'd sabotaged a rival's garden to win a flower show, her smile as sweet as Evelyn's, her hands just as steady. The understudy's alibi was plausible, but its precision felt rehearsed, like a line memorized for a performance. Outside, Inspector Craddock was waiting, his notebook tucked under his arm. "Well?" he asked, his voice low. "What's your read on Miss Trent?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained grave. "She's a careful young woman, Inspector, but careful people often have the most to hide. Her story fits, yet it's too neat, like a costume tailored too perfectly. The powder, the rose, small things, but they point to her presence." She paused, her gaze distant. "In my village, a girl once lied about a stolen brooch because she wanted to shine brighter than her friend. Miss Trent wants to shine, I think, and Clara's light was too bright." Craddock nodded, his face thoughtful. "We're checking her room for anything. Powder, another scarf, even that knot. If she's hiding something, we'll find it." He glanced down the corridor, where the troop's whispers had grown softer, tinged with fear. "Ricci's temper is loud, but Trent's quiet bothers me more. She's got motive. Clara's role was her dream." Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. "Motive is only half the story, Inspector. The scarf's knot, the powder's shade. These are the other half. Someone chose Clara's death to look like a performance, and Miss Trent knows the stage as well as any." She turned toward the costume workshop, where Madame Fournier's sharp voice echoed faintly. "Let us see what the next thread reveals," she said, her mind already weaving the clues into a pattern, each stitch bringing her closer to the truth. Chapter 6. The Costume Designer's Secrets, the Grand Lyceum. Theater's costume workshop was a cavern of creativity, its air thick with the scent of starched linen and dye, its tables strewn with bolts of silk, spools of thread, and glittering sequins. Miss Jane Marple stepped into this domain with the quiet curiosity of a village spinster visiting a neighbor's garden, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles, her hands clasped as if to restrain their urge to knit. The gas lamps cast a warm glow over the chaos, illuminating racks of costumes, velvet capes, feathered headdresses, and the emerald gown that had adorned Clara Voss in her final moments. The memory of that gown, torn at the shoulder, and the indigo scarf, knotted with a sailor's hitch, lingered in Miss Marple's mind, each detail a thread in the tapestry of murder she was steadily weaving. Madame Louise Fournier, the costume designer, stood at a cutting table, her wiry frame bent over a swath of crimson fabric, her scissors moving with the precision of a surgeon. Her gray hair was pulled into a tight chignon, and her sharp features were set in a scowl that softened only slightly at Miss Marple's approach. "What now?" she snapped, her French accent slicing through the hum of the workshop. "The police have already poked through my things, asking foolish questions. I have work to do, even with Clara gone." Her voice held a note of disdain, but her eyes, darting to the door, betrayed a flicker of unease. "Madame Fournier," Miss Marple said, her tone as gentle as a breeze through St. Mary Mead's roses, "I am sorry to trouble you. I only wish to understand a little more about poor Madame Voss and her costume. You designed it, I believe?" She settled onto a stool, her small figure almost lost amid the clutter, but her gaze was steady, taking in the scissors' gleam, the neat rows of pins, and a small sewing box, its lid ajar, revealing a tangle of threads. Fournier set down her scissors, her hands restless, as if they longed for occupation. "Oui, I designed Clara's gown," she said, her voice clipped. "Emerald silk, fitted to her like a glove, though she complained it was too tight. Always complaining, that one. Too tight, too heavy, too plain. She tore the shoulder this morning, demanding I fix it before the show." Her lips thinned, a spark of resentment in her eyes. "I was in here, sewing, from 6 until the scream. Ask my assistant, she'll tell you." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of kindly interest, though her mind was alert, sifting through Fournier's words. "The scarf, madame," she said softly. "The indigo one with silver threads. You chose it for Clara's costume, didn't you? A beautiful piece, but she didn't care for it, I hear." She watched Fournier closely, noting the slight twitch of her fingers, the way her gaze flicked to a rack where similar scarves hung, their colors muted in the dim light. "Oui, the scarf was mine," Fournier admitted, her tone grudging. "Signor Ricci gave it to me for the costume, a Milanese silk, perfect for Violetta's second act. Clara said it was too heavy, but I tied it loosely, just for effect. I left her at 6:15, alive and fussing as always." She folded her arms, her eyes narrowing. "You think I tied it to kill her? Ridiculous. I am an artist, not a murderer." Her voice was sharp, but Miss Marple caught a faint tremor, as if the accusation had struck a nerve. "You are indeed an artist," Miss Marple said, her voice soothing, as if praising a village seamstress's embroidery. "Your work is exquisite, madam. It must be trying, though, when a star like Clara demands changes. In my village, we had a dressmaker who grew quite cross when her patterns were altered." She paused, her eyes lingering on the sewing box, where a spool of silver thread glinted, matching the scarf's embroidery. "You tied the scarf yourself, you say. Did you ever learn knots, perhaps for securing costumes or sets?" Fournier's scowl deepened, her hands clenching. "Knots? I sew, I pin, I cut. I have no need for sailor's tricks. The scarf was a prop, nothing more. Someone else must have tightened it." Her words were firm, but Miss Marple noted the way her fingers brushed the scissors, as if seeking comfort in their familiar weight. "And who else handled it?" Miss Marple asked, her tone as light as a summer breeze. "Miss Trent, perhaps? She was in Clara's room, helping with the costume." Fournier snorted, a sound both derisive and bitter. "That girl? Always hovering, pretending to help, but her eyes were on Clara's role, not her gown. She was there when I tied the scarf, watching like a hawk. Said she wanted to learn, but I know ambition when I see it." Her voice dripped with scorn, and Miss Marple's lips twitched, recognizing the same sharp tongue she'd heard in St. Mary Mead's postmistress, quick to judge her neighbor's faults. "And the rose," Miss Marple said, shifting tack. "The red one found near Clara. Not from her bouquet, I think. Did you see it?" Fournier's eyes flickered, a moment's hesitation. "A rose? Non, I saw no rose. Clara's admirers sent flowers, yes, but I pay no attention to such nonsense. My work is the costume, not her gifts." Her tone was dismissive, but Miss Marple noted the slight flush on her cheeks, as if the question had caught her off guard. Miss Marple rose, her movements slow and deliberate, her eyes scanning the workshop. A pair of scissors, their blades gleaming, lay on the table, and beside them a scrap of emerald silk torn in a way that matched Clara's gown. "You repaired the tear in her dress," she said, almost to herself. "It must have been urgent, with the performance so near." Fournier nodded, her expression guarded. "I fixed it at 6 before I left her. She was careless, always tugging at the seams." Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the silk, its edges frayed but neatly trimmed, as if someone had tidied the damage with care. As she moved toward the door, Miss Marple paused, her hand on the frame. "One last thing, madame. The powder on Clara's mirror. It was pale, not her usual shade. Did you ever use such a powder in your work, perhaps for a costume effect?" Fournier's eyes widened, a flash of alarm quickly masked. "Powder? No, I use none of that. Clara had her own, always too much of it. If it was pale, it was not mine." Her voice was firm, but Miss Marple noted the way. Her hand tightened on the scissors, a gesture as telling as a confession. Stepping into the corridor, Miss Marple's mind churned with the precision of a well-tuned clock. Fournier's resentment was palpable, her pride a shield that hid something deeper, perhaps a grudge nursed through countless alterations, countless slights. The silver thread in her sewing box matched the scarf's embroidery, and her claim of ignorance about the rose felt too quick, too practiced. Pride, Miss Marple thought, can be as dangerous as ambition. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead Milliner, who'd sabotaged a rival's hat out of spite, her hands as steady as Fournier's, her denials just as sharp. Inspector Craddock was waiting outside, his face etched with the strain of the case. "What's your take on Madame Fournier?" he asked, his notebook open, ready for her insights. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained grave. "She's a woman of skill, Inspector, but skill can cut both ways. Her resentment of Clara is clear, and her hands know the scarf better than most. Yet her alibi holds for now, and the rose puzzles me. It doesn't fit her story." She paused, her gaze distant. "In my village, a woman once hid a stolen pin in her sewing basket, thinking no one would look there. Madame Fournier's workshop may hold more than costumes." Craddock nodded, jotting a note. "We're searching her things, threads, scissors, anything that might link to the scarf or that powder. If she's hiding something, we'll find it." He glanced down the corridor, where the troup's murmurs had grown hushed, as if the theater itself were listening. Trent's ambition, Ricci's temper, and now Fournier's pride, they're all tangled up in this. But that knot, Miss Marple, it's the key, isn't it? Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. "The knot, the powder, the rose, they're all keys, Inspector. Each unlocks a piece of the truth. Madame Fournier tied the scarf, but someone else tightened it, and that someone knew her work well." She turned toward the foyer, where Harold Blake, the fan, lingered like a shadow. "Let us see what the next piece reveals," she said, her mind already threading the clues together, each stitch bringing her closer to the heart of the murder. Chapter 7. The Fan's Devotion. The foyer of the Grand Lyceum. Theater, usually a place of glittering anticipation, was subdued under the pall of Clara Voss's murder. The chandeliers cast a muted glow on the marble floor, and the murmur of the lingering crowd was a low hum, like bees disturbed from their hive. Miss Jane Marple stood near a gilded pillar, her slight figure almost lost in the grandeur. Her eyes sharp behind her spectacles as she observed the man before her, Harold Blake, the fan whose devotion to Clara bordered on obsession. Her hands, idle without her knitting, were clasped lightly, but her mind was anything but still, weaving together the threads of the case. The indigo scarf's sailor's hitch, the pale powder smudged on the mirror, the bruised red rose that seemed to whisper of intent. Each clue was a stitch in the pattern, and Harold Blake, with his nervous gestures and fervent gaze, was the next to be examined. Blake stood by the ticket booth, clutching a crumpled program from a previous La Traviata performance, its edges worn as if handled 1,000 times. His suit was threadbare, the cuffs frayed, and his tie was knotted unevenly, as if tied in haste. His sallow face, lined with the weariness of middle age, held a feverish intensity, his eyes darting as if expecting Clara to emerge from the wings. At Miss Marple's approach, he started, his fingers tightening on the program. "You're with the police, aren't you?" he said, his voice high and unsteady. "I told them everything. I'd never hurt her. Never." "Mr. Blake," Miss Marple said, her tone as gentle as a village vicar consoling a parishioner. "I'm only an old lady trying to understand this tragedy. You admired Madame Voss greatly, I hear. Might we talk a moment?" She gestured to a nearby bench, its velvet cushion faded but inviting, and settled herself with a quiet grace that belied her keen observation. Blake hesitated, then sat, his hands restless, tugging at his tie as if it constricted him. "She was an angel," he said, his voice trembling with reverence. Her voice, it was like nothing else, pure and heartbreaking. I've been to every performance this season, every one. I'd sit in the gallery just to hear her sing Violetta's aria. His eyes misted, and he clutched the program tighter, as if it were a relic. I only wanted to see her tonight, to give her a rose, but they wouldn't let me backstage. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of kindly sympathy, though her mind was alert, sifting through his words. "A rose?" she said softly. "A red one, perhaps? Like the one found near poor Clara?" Blake's eyes widened, a flicker of alarm crossing his face before he shook his head. "I tried to give her one, yes, at the stage door, around 6:30, but the stage manager, Grayson, pushed me away. I left it on a crate outside her door. I don't know if she took it." His voice wavered, and Miss Marple noted the tremor in his hands, the way his fingers twisted the program's edge. "You were near her dressing room then," she said, her tone as light as a summer breeze. "Did you see anyone else there? Miss Trent, perhaps, or Madame Fournier?" Her eyes, though gentle, were sharp, watching for the smallest shift in his demeanor. Blake's gaze darted to the floor, then back to her. "I saw Miss Trent," he said, his voice low. "She was coming out of Clara's room just before 7. She looked upset, hurried. I thought maybe Clara had scolded her again." He paused, then added, "And there was a stagehand, carrying ropes or something near the corridor." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, her mind filing away the detail. The rose, left on a crate, could have been the one found broken beside Clara, its petals bruised as if dropped in haste. "You're very devoted, Mr. Blake," she said, her voice warm but probing. "It must have been hard, loving someone so unreachable. In my village, we had a young man who adored a singer from afar, writing her letters she never answered. It made him restless." She watched him closely, noting the flush that crept up his neck. Blake's hands stilled, his eyes meeting hers with a mix of defiance and pain. "I never expected her to notice me," he said. "I just wanted to be near her, to hear her sing. I'd never harm her, never." His voice rose, drawing a glance from a nearby usher, and he lowered it, his shoulders slumping. "I was outside, by the stage door, until they found her. I heard the scream and tried to get in, but the police were already there." Miss Marple tilted her head, her gaze lingering on his tie, its knot loose and clumsy, unlike the precise sailor's hitch that had ended Clara's life. "You know the theater well, don't you?" she said. "All those visits, watching from the gallery. "Have you ever helped backstage? Perhaps learned the ropes, as they say?" Her tone was light, but her eyes were keen, searching for a crack in his fervent facade. Blake shook his head, his fingers tugging at his tie again. "No, I'm no stagehand. I just watch, listen. The theater's magic is in the performance, not the ropes or props." His voice was earnest, but Miss Marple caught a fleeting hesitation, as if he were guarding a secret too small to notice. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Postman, devoted to his rounds, who'd once hidden a stolen letter in his satchel, thinking his devotion would shield him from suspicion. "And the scarf," she said, almost casually. "The indigo one Clara wore. Did you ever see it, perhaps in rehearsals?" Blake's eyes flickered, a shadow of confusion crossing his face. "I saw her wear it once, in a dress rehearsal," he said. "It was beautiful, like her, but I didn't touch it. I was never close enough." His voice cracked, and he looked away, his hands trembling as he smoothed the program. Miss Marple's expression softened, though her mind was relentless, turning over his story. His devotion was genuine, but devotion could twist, like a vine choking a tree. The rose, left at the stage door, was a tangible link to the crime scene, yet his clumsy hands seemed ill-suited to the scarf's intricate knot. "You've been very kind, Mr. Blake," she said, rising from the bench. "One last thing. Did you notice any powder, perhaps on Clara's costume, when you saw her last?" Blake frowned, his brow furrowing. "Powder? No, I didn't get close enough. She was always surrounded, always out of reach." His voice held a note of longing, and Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away his words. As she stepped away, Inspector Craddock approached, his notebook tucked under his arm, his face etched with the strain of the case. "What's your read on Blake?" he asked, his voice low to avoid the ears of lingering ushers. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained grave. "He's a man consumed, Inspector, but whether by love or something darker, I'm not yet sure. His rose is a clue, but his hands don't seem made for that knot. Still, devotion can blind a man to his own actions." She paused, her gaze distant, as if seeing her village green. "In St. Mary Mead, a farmer once followed a girl to every dance, swearing he'd never harm her, yet broke her gait in a jealous rage. Mr. Blake's passion may hide a similar flaw." Craddock nodded, jotting a note. "We're checking the stage door, the crate where he says he left the rose. If it's the same one, it places him close to the scene. But that knot? It's too precise for a man like him, isn't it?" He glanced at the foyer, where Blake still sat, his head bowed over the program. Ricci's temper, Trent's ambition, Fournier's pride, and now Blake's obsession. They're all tangled up, but we're no closer to the truth. Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. "The truth, Inspector, is in the details, the rose, the powder, the knot. Mr. Blake's story is one of longing, but longing can lead to desperate acts. We must look closer at what he saw and what he didn't say." She turned toward the corridor, where the troup's whispers had faded to a tense silence, and her mind began to weave the next thread, ready to unravel the secrets hidden in the theater's shadows. Chapter 8. The Threads Align. The Grand Lyceum. Theater, its opulent facade now cloaked in the gloom of a rainy London evening, seemed to hold its secrets as tightly as the indigo scarf had held Clara Voss's throat. Miss Jane Marple sat in her modest box, the plush velvet seat a stark contrast to her simple woolen shawl, her knitting needles clicking softly in her lap. The auditorium was empty, the audience long dispersed, but the echoes of their shock lingered, mingling with the faint creak of the stage machinery below. Her mind, as sharp as the needles in her hands, wove together the clues she had gathered. The scarf's sailor's hitch, the pale powder smudged on mirror, the bruised red rose, and the torn seam of Clara's emerald gown. Each was a thread in a tapestry of murder. And now, having spoken to Signor Ricci, Evelyn Trent, Madame Fournier, and Harold Blake, Miss Marple felt the pattern beginning to take shape. Inspector Craddock had invited her to remain, his trust in her village-bred wisdom outweighing his professional skepticism. "You've a knack for this, Miss Marple," he'd said, his voice weary but warm. "Stay, and let's see what your eyes catch." She had nodded, her expression serene, but her thoughts were restless, turning over the suspect's words like stones in a stream. Ricci's fiery temper, Trent's calculated calm, Fournier's sharp-edged pride, Blake's fervent devotion, each had motive, each had opportunity, yet none quite fit the precision of the crime. The scarf, she thought, was the key. It's not a deliberate signature, not of impulse, but of intent. She rose, her knitting tucked into her reticule, and made her way backstage, where the air was heavy with the scent of grease paint and damp wood. The corridor was quieter now, the troup's whispers hushed by exhaustion, but the tension remained, palpable as a held breath. Miss Marple paused outside Clara's dressing room, where a constable stood guard, his young face pale under his helmet. "May I look again, dear?" she asked, her voice as gentle as a grandmother's. The constable hesitated, then stepped aside, recognizing her as Craddock's unofficial ally. "Just don't touch anything, ma'am," he said, and she smiled, her eyes already scanning the room. The dressing room was as she remembered, its crimson walls glowing under the gaslight, Clara's body now removed, but the scene untouched. The shattered perfume bottle still lay on the rug, its jasmine scent faded but lingering. The torn gown hung on a rack, its emerald silk catching the light. The red rose, its petals bruised, rested in a paper bag for evidence. Miss Marple's gaze settled on the mirror, where the smudge of pale powder remained, a faint accusation. She stepped closer, her fingers hovering but not touching, and noted a second smudge, this one waxy, like the crimson lipstick Clara favored. She was at the mirror, Miss Marple murmured, facing her killer, perhaps, or turning at the last moment. Her eyes drifted to the scarf, now sealed in evidence, its indigo folds and silver threads vivid in her memory. The sailor's hitch, so precise, suggested a hand practiced in such work, not Ricci's, whose passion was too chaotic, not Blake's, whose clumsy fingers fumbled even his tie. Perhaps Fournier's, with her tailor's dexterity, but her denial had rung true. That left Evelyn Trent, the understudy, whose neat appearance and steady hands hinted at a control that could tie such a knot. Miss Marple thought of a St. Mary Mead girl, a quiet baker's daughter who'd once rigged a rival's oven to fail, her calm masking a fierce ambition. Evelyn wanted Clara's role, she mused, and ambition is a thread that pulls tightly. She stepped back, her mind turning to the rose. Harold Blake had claimed to leave it at the stage door, yet it lay beside Clara, broken as if dropped in haste. Had someone carried it inside, or had Blake lied about his distance from the scene? The powder, too, was troubling, pale, like Evelyn's, not Clara's bold rouge. Fournier had denied using it, and Ricci's office held no such cosmetics. Miss Marple's lips pursed, her thoughts circling the suspects' alibis. Ricci had been in his office, writing, Fournier in her workshop, sewing, Blake at the stage door, pleading, Evelyn in Clara's room, checking a cue. Each story was plausible, yet each had a seam that might unravel under pressure. Craddock appeared at the door, his notebook bulging with notes, his face etched with the strain of a case that refused to resolve. "We've searched their rooms," he said, his voice low. "Ricci's got cigars and scripts, but no scarves or powder. Fournier's workshop is a maze of threads, some silver, like the scarfs, but nothing conclusive. Blake's lodgings are bare, just programs and a few wilted roses, none fresh. Trent's room had that pale powder, same shade as the smudge, but she says it's hers, nothing unusual." He rubbed his jaw, his eyes meeting hers. "You're thinking it's her, aren't you? The understudy." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained grave. "I'm thinking, Inspector, that murder is like a quilt. Each patch seems separate until you see the whole. The scarf points to Ricci, but he was far from the scene. The powder points to Evelyn, but it's too obvious, like a stitch left loose on purpose. The rose points to Blake, yet it's out of place, a prop in the wrong act." She paused, her gaze distant, as if seeing her village green. "In St. Mary Mead, a girl once left a hairpin in a stolen cake, thinking it would point to another. Our killer may have done the same, scattering clues to confuse us." Craddock nodded, his brow furrowing. "That knot, though, it's not something you learn overnight. We've asked around. No one in the troupe admits to knowing it, but a stagehand mentioned some old rigging manuals backstage. Sailors' knots, used for sets. Anyone could have studied them." He glanced at the dressing room, his voice dropping. "What's your next move, Miss Marple? You've got a way of pulling the right thread." She smiled faintly, her hands adjusting her shawl. "We must look closer, Inspector, at the small things. The knot was deliberate, a signature of skill. The powder was left to be found, perhaps to point a finger. The rose, though, it bothers me most. It wasn't Clara's, nor part of the costume. Someone brought it, and someone dropped it." She turned toward the corridor, where the troupe's shadows moved like ghosts. "I'd like to speak to the stagehand, the one who mentioned the manuals. And perhaps Miss Trent again. Her hands are too steady for her story." Craddock jotted a note, his respect for her growing. "I'll get the stagehand, and we're testing the scarf for traces, sweat, skin, anything. If Trent's powder matches, or if we find that knot in those manuals, we're closer." He hesitated, then added, "You think it's her, don't you? The ambition, the role, she had the most to gain." Miss Marple's lips curved slightly, but her eyes were sharp. "Gain, Inspector, is only part of it. In my village, a woman once killed for less, a place in a choir, a moment in the light. But the how matters as much as the why. The knot, the powder, the rose, they're a story, and we're nearly at its end." She stepped into the corridor, her mind weaving the clues into a tighter pattern, each stitch drawing her closer to the truth hidden in the theater's shadows. Chapter 9. A Quiet Observation. The Grand Lyceum. Theater, its grandeur dimmed by the shadow of murder, seemed to hold its breath as the investigation deepened. The backstage corridors, once alive with the bustle of rehearsal, were now hushed, the air thick with suspicion and the faint tang of gaslight. Miss Jane Marple stood just outside Clara Voss's dressing room, her small figure dwarfed by the towering flats and coiled ropes, her eyes as sharp as the pins in her reticule. Her knitting, tucked away for the moment, was replaced by a quiet intensity, her mind weaving together the clues that had emerged: the indigo scarf's sailor's hitch, the pale powder smudged on the mirror, the bruised red rose, and the torn seam of Clara's emerald gown. Each was a piece of a puzzle, and her conversations with Signor Ricci, Evelyn Trent, Madame Fournier, and Harold Blake had tightened the threads, pointing toward a truth that was both deliberate and deceptive. Inspector Craddock, his face lined with the strain of a case that refused to unravel, approached her, his notebook now a crumpled testament to hours of fruitless questioning. "We've got the stagehand waiting, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low to avoid the ears of a lingering chorus girl. "And we're bringing Trent back for another round. That powder in her room, it's a match for the smudge, though she swears it's just her own makeup. The scarf's clean of prints, but we're still checking for fibers." He glanced at the dressing room, its door ajar, and sighed. "You wanted another look. What are you hoping to find?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained grave. "Sometimes, Inspector, it's not what you find, but what you see anew. In my village, a woman once solved a theft by noticing a single petal out of place in a garden. The smallest things speak loudest." She stepped into the dressing room, her movements slow and deliberate, as if each step were a stitch in her mental tapestry. The constable at the door nodded, accustomed now to her quiet authority, and she entered the room, its crimson walls glowing faintly under the flickering gaslight. The scene was as she remembered, though Clara's body was gone, leaving an emptiness that seemed to echo her absence. The shattered perfume bottle lay on the rug, its jasmine scent now a faint memory. The emerald gown hung on a rack, its torn seam a silent accusation. The red rose, sealed in evidence, was absent, but its image lingered in her mind, its petals bruised as if crushed by a careless hand. Miss Marple's gaze settled on the mirror, where the pale powder smudge remained, a ghostly trace beside the waxy crimson of Clara's lipstick. She bent closer, her spectacles glinting, and noted a faint scratch on the mirror's edge, barely visible, as if something had scraped against it. A ring, perhaps, or a metal clasp. "The mirror saw everything," she murmured, her voice soft as a whisper in St. Mary Mead's church. "Clara was here, preparing, when her killer came. The scarf was already around her neck, part of the costume, but tightened with purpose." She straightened, her eyes drifting to the rug, where the perfume's amber stain had darkened. A tiny glint caught her attention, a sliver of glass, half hidden by the rug's fringe, smaller than the shards from the bottle. She pointed it out to Craddock, who knelt to examine it. "Not from the perfume," he said, frowning. "Too thin, like a vial or a lens. We'll bag it." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to the scarf, its sailor's hitch a knot of chilling precision. "That knot, Inspector," she said. "It's not a common skill. You mentioned rigging manuals. Might I see them?" Craddock signaled to a constable, who fetched a worn, leather-bound book from the stage manager's office. Its pages were dog-eared, filled with diagrams of ropes and knots, including a detailed sketch of a double hitch, identical to the one that had ended Clara's life. "Stagehands use these for sets," Craddock said. "Anyone could have studied it, Trent, Fournier, even Blake if he snooped around." Miss Marple's lips pursed, her fingers tracing the diagram without touching it. Anyone, yes, but not everyone would choose it. The knot is a signature, deliberate, like a line in a play meant to be noticed. She closed the book, her thoughts circling Evelyn Trent, whose neat hands and quiet ambition seemed suited to such precision. The powder, too, pointed to her, pale like the compact in her room, not Clara's bold rouge. Yet the rose troubled her, its presence unexplained by Fournier's pride or Ricci's temper. Blake's claim of leaving it at the stage door felt plausible, but its place beside Clara suggested someone had carried it inside, perhaps to mislead. She stepped back, her eyes scanning the room once more. The torn seam of the gown caught her attention again, its stitches frayed but not random, as if pulled with intent. "The tear," she said softly. "It's too neat for a struggle. Someone tugged it, perhaps to distract Clara, to make her turn." She thought of a saint. Mary Mead's seamstress who'd once cut a rival's hem to ruin her dress, her hands as steady as Evelyn's, her motive as hidden. "Miss Trent was here," she murmured, "helping with the costume, or so she said, but helping can be a mask." Craddock followed her gaze, his brow furrowing. "You're leaning toward Trent, aren't you? The powder, her presence, the role she wanted. It fits." He hesitated, then added, "But Blake's rose and Fournier's thread, they muddy the waters, and Ricci's scarf, his temper, we can't rule him out." He rubbed his temples, the weight of the case pressing harder. "We're missing something, Miss Marple, something small, like you always say." She smiled faintly, her hands clasped. "Small things, Inspector, are the heart of it. In my village, a boy once stole a pie and left a crumb on his collar, thinking no one would notice. Our killer has left crumbs, powder, a rose, a knot. We must follow them carefully." She turned toward the door, where the stagehand, a wiry man named Tompkins, waited, his cap twisted in his hands. "Mr. Tompkins," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You know the rigging manuals. Have you seen anyone studying them recently? Perhaps Miss Trent or Madame Fournier?" Tompkins shifted, his eyes darting to Craddock. "Can't say for sure, ma'am," he said, his voice rough. "Those manuals are always lying about. Stagehands use them for sets, curtains, that sort of thing. Miss Trent's been around, asking about props, saying she wants to know the whole show. Madame Fournier, too, checks the ropes for costume changes. Even that fan, Mr. Blake, was poking around last week, asking how the sets move." He shrugged, uneasy. "Could be any of them." Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away his words. Evelyn's curiosity, Fournier's practicality, Blake's persistence. Each could have led to the manual, to the knot. She thanked Tompkins, her thoughts returning to the powder, its pale shade a silent accusation. "Inspector," she said, "might we test Miss Trent's compact against the smudge? Not just the shade, but the texture. Some powders are finer, meant for the stage." Craddock nodded, jotting a note. "Already on it, and we're checking the rose for pollen, anything to tie it to Blake's story." As they left the dressing room, Miss Marple's mind churned, the clues aligning like stitches in a quilt. Evelyn's ambition was the strongest thread, her presence in the room, her powder a near match. Yet the rose, Blake's offering, suggested a second hand, perhaps a deliberate misdirection. Fournier's silver thread and Ricci's scarf added complexity, but the knot remained the heart of it, a skill that pointed to control, not chaos. Someone planned this, she thought, and planned it well, like a performance meant to dazzle and deceive. Craddock paused in the corridor, his eyes meeting hers. "You're close, aren't you?" he said, his voice low. "You've got that look, like you're seeing the whole picture." Miss Marple's lips curved slightly, but her eyes were sharp. "Not the whole, Inspector, but enough to know the stage is set. The killer wanted Clara gone, but also wanted us to look elsewhere. We must watch closely now, for the next act will reveal them. She turned toward the rehearsal room, where Evelyn Trent would soon face her again, and felt the pattern tightening, each clue a step closer to the truth. Chapter 10. The trap is set. The Grand Lyceum Theater, its opulent interior now cloaked in the hush of a late evening, seemed to hold its secrets in the shadows of its gilded arches. The rain had ceased, leaving a damp chill that seeped through the corridors, where the faint glow of gas lamps cast flickering patterns on the walls. Miss Jane Marple stood in the wings, her small figure nearly invisible against the heavy velvet curtains, her eyes as keen as ever behind her spectacles. Her knitting remained in her reticule, but her mind was at work, stitching together the clues that had emerged over the past hours. The indigo scarf's sailor's hitch, the pale powder smudged on Clara Voss's mirror, the bruised red rose, and the torn seam of the emerald gown. Each suspect, Signor Ricci, Evelyn Trent, Madame Fournier, and Harold Blake, had woven a story, but the threads of truth were beginning to align, and Miss Marple sensed the moment to draw them tight was near. Inspector Craddock, his face etched with the fatigue of a relentless investigation, approached her, his boots echoing softly on the worn floorboards. "We've got the troupe gathered in the auditorium," he said, his voice low, tinged with anticipation. "Your idea, Miss Marple, this ruse about new evidence. I hope it shakes something loose." He glanced at the stage, where the curtains hung still, as if waiting for a performance. "The powder's a match for Trent's compact, down to the grain. The rose pollen traces to a local florist Blake frequents. The scarf's fibers are clean, but that knot, it's still our best lead. What's your play?" Miss Marple's lips curved faintly, her hands clasped as if to steady her thoughts. "A trap, Inspector, is like a net in my village. A few well-placed threads can catch the unwary. Our killer is clever, but cleverness falters under pressure. We must make them feel the knot tightening." Her eyes twinkled, though her expression remained grave. "Announce that the scarf's knot has been traced to someone with theatrical training, someone who studied the rigging manuals. Watch their faces, Inspector. The guilty will flinch, even if only for a moment." Craddock nodded, his respect for her village-bred insight unwavering. "We'll do it. I've got my men in the wings, ready to move if anyone bolts. Trent's our strongest suspect, but I'm not ruling out Fournier or even Blake." He hesitated, then added, "You're sure about this?" "It's a risk, stirring them up without hard proof." Miss Marple's gaze was steady. "Proof comes when the guilty reveal themselves, Inspector. In St. Mary Mead, a girl once betrayed her theft by blushing when the stolen ring was mentioned. Our killer will betray themselves too." They moved to the auditorium, where the troupe sat in scattered rows, their faces pale under the dim chandeliers. Signor Ricci slouched in a front seat, his arms crossed, his dark eyes smoldering with impatience. Evelyn Trent sat 2 rows back, her auburn hair pinned tightly, her hands folded with a calm that seemed almost too perfect. Madame Fournier perched on the aisle, her sharp features set in a scowl, her fingers twitching as if longing for her scissors. Harold Blake lingered at the back, his sallow face half hidden in shadow, his program clutched like a talisman. The air was thick with tension, each suspect a player in a drama they could not escape. Craddock took the stage, his broad shoulders squared, his voice carrying the authority of the law. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone deliberate. "We have new evidence in the murder of Madame Clara Voss. The scarf used to strangle her was tied with a sailor's hitch, a knot not easily learned. We've traced it to someone with access to the theater's rigging manuals, someone with theatrical training who knew exactly how to tie it." He paused, his eyes sweeping the room, as Miss Marple had instructed. "We're close to an arrest, but I'll give you one chance to come forward now." Miss Marple stood in the shadows of the wings, her eyes fixed on the suspects. Ricci's hands clenched, his jaw tightening, but his indignation seemed more theatrical than guilty. Fournier's scowl deepened, her fingers gripping her skirt, but her posture held the rigidity of pride, not panic. Blake shrank back, his eyes wide with fear, his fingers twisting his tie. A reaction of nerves, not confession. But Evelyn Trent remained still, her face a mask of composure, her hands steady in her lap. Yet Miss Marple caught a flicker, a slight tightening of her lips, a momentary clench of her fingers, as if the mention of the knot had struck a chord. "Miss Trent," Miss Marple said, stepping forward, her voice gentle, but carrying through the auditorium like a clear bell. "You were in Clara's room, helping with her costume. You saw the scarf, tied loosely by Madame Fournier. You knew the role of Violetta, every note, every gesture. And you knew the rigging manuals, didn't you? You studied them, perhaps to understand the stage, or perhaps for something else." Her tone was soft, almost conversational, but her eyes were relentless, pinning Evelyn like a butterfly to a board. Evelyn's composure wavered, her green eyes darting to Craddock, then back to Miss Marple. "I told you," she said, her voice steady but strained. "I was only there for a moment asking about a cue. I don't know knots. I'm a singer, not a stagehand." Her hands remained folded, but Miss Marple noted their whiteness. The knuckles pressed tight against the gray fabric of her dress. "The powder on the mirror," Miss Marple continued, her tone unchanged. "It matched yours, my dear. And the knot, it was tied with a precision your hands could manage, hands that pin hair so neatly, that practice scales with such care." The auditorium fell silent, the troop's eyes fixed on Evelyn, whose face paled but held its mask. Ricci shifted, muttering something in Italian, while Fournier's lips twitched, as if suppressing a comment. Blake's hands trembled, his program crumpling further. Craddock stepped forward, his voice firm. "Miss Trent, we've found the manual in your dressing room, marked at the page for the sailor's hitch. Care to explain?" It was a bluff, as Miss Marple had suggested, but it landed like a stone in still water. Evelyn's mask cracked, her eyes widening, her hands unclenching to grip the armrests. "That's not true," she cried, her voice rising. "I never touched those manuals. I only wanted to learn the role, to be ready." Her composure shattered, her breath coming in short gasps. "I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted her to miss the performance, to be ill, to give me a chance. I tightened the scarf, just to scare her, but she struggled, and it was too late." The words spilled out, a confession torn from a heart too long suppressed, and the auditorium gasped, the troop's murmurs rising like a wave. Miss Marple's expression softened, though her eyes held a quiet sorrow. "Ambition, my dear," she said gently, "is a dangerous flame. It burns brighter than you expect." She thought of a saint, Mary Mead girl who'd sabotaged a rival's cake to win a fair, her tears as bitter as Evelyn's now. Craddock signaled to his constables, who moved to Evelyn's side, their faces grim. "Evelyn Trent, you're under arrest for the murder of Clara Voss." he said, his voice steady as he read her rights. As Evelyn was led away, her head bowed, her hands trembling, the troupe erupted in whispers, Ricci's voice rising in outrage, Fournier's in vindication, Blake's in stunned silence. Miss Marple stepped back into the shadows, her mind already unraveling the final threads. The rose, she noted, remained a loose end. Blake's gift, perhaps, but placed by Evelyn to mislead. The powder, the knot, the torn seam, all pointed to her careful plan, undone by a moment's panic. Human nature, Miss Marple thought, is the same in a theater as in a village. It hides, but it always reveals itself. Craddock joined her, his notebook closed, his face a mix of relief and exhaustion. "You did it, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low. "That bluff about the manual. It broke her. We'll search her room again, but I'm betting we'll find it now." He shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "How do you do it? See what we miss?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained grave. "I only watch, Inspector, as I do in St. Mary Mead. People are the same everywhere, and their secrets leave traces, a knot, a smudge, a broken rose." She turned toward the exit, where the theater's lights were dimming, and felt the weight of the case lift, leaving only the quiet certainty of truth. Chapter 11. The Confession. The Grand Lyceum. Theater, its grandeur now subdued by the weight of tragedy, seemed to exhale as the truth emerged from the shadows. The auditorium, where moments ago the troupe had sat in tense anticipation, was now a whirl of murmurs and shocked gasps, the air thick with the aftermath of Evelyn Trent's confession. Miss Jane Marple stood in the wings, her small figure half hidden by the heavy velvet curtains, her eyes bright behind her spectacles. Her hands, free of her knitting, were clasped lightly, but her mind was as active as ever, stitching together the final threads of the case. The indigo scarf's sailor's hitch, the pale powder on Clara Voss's mirror, the bruised red rose, and the torn seam of the emerald gown. Evelyn's outburst had confirmed her suspicions, but there were still details to unravel, loose ends that needed tying before the curtain could truly fall. Inspector Craddock, his face a mix of relief and grim determination, oversaw Evelyn's arrest as the constables gently but firmly escorted her from the auditorium. Her auburn hair, once pinned so meticulously, now fell in strands across her pale face, and her green eyes, wide with panic, darted to Miss Marple as if seeking mercy. "I didn't mean it," she cried again, her voice breaking as she was led toward the stage door. "I only wanted her to miss the performance, to give me a chance. She wasn't supposed to die." The troupe watched in stunned silence, Signor Ricci's hands clenched in fury, Madame Fournier's lips pursed in vindictive satisfaction, and Harold Blake's sallow face frozen in disbelief, his program crumpled in his trembling hands. Miss Marple stepped forward, her expression one of quiet sorrow, as if witnessing a village tragedy unfold in her own St. Mary Mead. "Poor child," she murmured, though her voice carried no judgment, only understanding. "Ambition can twist the heart like a thread pulled too tight." She turned to Craddock, who joined her in the wings, his notebook now closed, its pages filled with the case's resolution. "You played that well, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low to avoid the troupe's ears. "That bluff about the rigging manual, it broke her, just as you said. We're searching her room now, and I'd wager we'll find it, along with anything else she's hidden." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes distant, as if seeing the green of her village rather than the theater's shadowed stage. "It was the knot, Inspector," she said softly. "It was too precise, too deliberate, for a moment of passion. Evelyn studied the manuals, perhaps under the guise of learning the stage, but she planned more than her role as Violetta." She paused, her mind turning to the other clues. The powder was hers, left on the mirror to point elsewhere, perhaps to Madame Fournier or even Mr. Blake. The rose, though, that was her mistake. She took it from his offering, placed it to confuse us, but it led back to her presence. Craddock rubbed his jaw, his eyes narrowing. The rose. Blake's story about leaving it at the stage door held up, but you're saying she carried it inside? Miss Marple's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "Yes, Inspector. In my village, a girl once left a flower in a rival's garden to make it seem she'd been there, but the petals betrayed her. Evelyn wanted us to suspect Blake, or perhaps Ricci, with his scarf. But she was in that room, tightening the scarf, tearing the gown to distract Clara, and dropping the rose in her haste." They moved to a small office near the stage, where Craddock's men had brought Evelyn for questioning before taking her to the station. The room was stark, its walls lined with old ledgers, a single lamp casting a harsh light on Evelyn's trembling figure. She sat at a table, her hands cuffed, her composure shattered like the perfume bottle in Clara's dressing room. Miss Marple settled opposite her, her presence calming, almost maternal, though her eyes missed nothing: the faint smudge of pale powder on Evelyn's sleeve, the nervous twitch of her fingers, the way her gaze avoided the light. "Miss Trent," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle as a summer breeze. "You loved the stage, didn't you? The light, the music, the chance to be Violetta. But Clara stood in your way." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, her breath hitching. "I did," she whispered. "I practiced every day, every note, every gesture. I was ready, but she was always there, shining brighter, taking everything. I just wanted one night, her night." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of quiet understanding. "So you went to her room, perhaps to talk, but you saw the scarf, already tied by Madame Fournier. You knew the knot from the manuals, didn't you?" Evelyn's head bowed, her voice barely audible. "I'd seen the stagehands use it for the curtains. I thought, if I tightened it, made her faint, she'd miss the show. I didn't mean to kill her. She struggled, pulled at the gown, and I panicked. It was too tight, too fast." Her sobs broke through, and Miss Marple's heart ached, though her mind remained clear. "And the rose?" Miss Marple asked, her tone unchanged. "You took it from the crate outside to make it seem someone else was there." Evelyn nodded, her tears falling. "I saw it, left by that man, Blake. I thought it would point to him or confuse things. I didn't think—" Her voice trailed off, and Miss Marple sighed, thinking of a St. Mary Mead girl who'd once hidden a stolen locket in another's drawer, only to be caught by her own carelessness. Craddock, standing by the door, jotted a final note. "We've got enough," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "The powder, the knot, your presence, it all fits. And we found the manual in your room, marked at the hitch." Evelyn's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "I didn't mark it," she cried, but her protest faltered under Craddock's steady gaze. Miss Marple's lips pursed, recognizing the lie, though she said nothing, letting the truth settle like dust. As the constables prepared to take Evelyn away, Miss Marple stepped back, her mind tying the final knots. The scarf, Ricci's gift, had been Fournier's choice, but Evelyn's hand had turned it deadly. The powder, her own, was a clumsy attempt to mislead, and the rose, Blake's offering, was her fatal error, linking her to the scene. Human nature, she thought, is so predictable, even in a theater's glare. Ambition, envy, desperation, they weave the same patterns, whether in St. Mary Mead or London. Craddock turned to her, his face softened by gratitude. "You've done it again, Miss Marple," he said. "We'd have taken weeks without you. That knot, that powder, you saw what we missed." She smiled faintly, her hands adjusting her shawl. "I only observe, Inspector, as I do at home. People leave traces, like crumbs on a path. You need only follow them." She glanced at Evelyn, now being led through the stage door, her dreams of Violetta shattered, and felt a pang of pity. "She wanted to shine," she murmured, "but the stage is unforgiving." As the office emptied, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes on the ledgers, their faded ink a reminder of the theater's fleeting glories. The case was nearly closed, but one thread, the rose's exact journey, remained loose, a detail she would ponder in the quiet of her village. For now, the truth was enough, and the Grand Lyceum could begin to heal, its shadows a little lighter. Chapter 12. The Curtain Falls. The Grand Lyceum Theater, its once vibrant halls now cloaked in the stillness of a resolved tragedy, seemed to sigh as the weight of Clara Voss's murder lifted. The rain had long since stopped, leaving the London night cool and clear, the stars faintly visible through the theater's high windows. Miss Jane Marple sat once more in her modest box, her woolen shawl draped over her shoulders, her knitting needles clicking softly in the dim light of a single gas lamp. The auditorium was empty, the troupe dispersed, some to their lodgings, others to whisper their shock in quiet corners. Evelyn Trent was gone, taken to the police station, her confession a raw wound in the theater's heart. Yet for Miss Marple, the case was not quite closed, not until every thread was neatly tied, as she would tie the ends of her knitting. Lady Beatrice Harwood, her dear friend, and the reason for Miss Marple's presence at the Lyceum, sat beside her, her elegant fan idle in her lap, her eyes wide with awe. "Jane," she said, her voice hushed, "you've done it again. How you saw through that girl's calm, I'll never understand. It was like watching a play unfold, only you wrote the ending." Her gloved hands twisted slightly, betraying the lingering unease of the evening's revelations. Miss Marple's needles paused, her lips curving into a faint, wistful smile. "Not quite, Beatrice," she said, her voice as gentle as a St. Mary Mead breeze. "I only read the lines already written, by human nature, by ambition, by envy. They're the same in a grand theater as in our little village, only dressed in finer costumes." Her eyes, bright behind her spectacles, drifted to the empty stage, where the crimson curtains hung still, as if mourning Clara's silenced voice. Evelyn wanted to be Violetta, but she didn't see the tragedy she was scripting for herself. Beatrice leaned closer, her fan tapping her chin. "But the scarf, the knot, that rose? How did you know it was her, Jane?" The others seemed just as likely. Ricci with his temper, Fournier with her grudges, even that poor man Blake with his obsession. Her voice held a mix of curiosity and admiration, as if Miss Marple were a conjurer revealing her tricks. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, the soft click-clack a counterpoint to her thoughts. "It was the knot, Beatrice," she said, her tone reflective. "A sailor's hitch, so precise, so deliberate. Signor Ricci's passion was too wild for such care, and Mr. Blake's hands too clumsy. Madame Fournier had the skill, but her pride was in her work, not in murder. Evelyn, though, her hands were steady, her ambition sharper than any needle. She studied the rigging manuals, not for sets, but for her plan. She paused, her eyes distant, as if seeing the green of St. Mary Mead. In our village, a girl once tampered with a rival's loom to win a weaving contest. The signs were there, a cut thread, a too-perfect pattern. Evelyn left signs, too, the powder, the rose, the torn gown. Beatrice's eyes widened, her fan stilled. The powder, that pale stuff on the mirror. You knew it was hers? Miss Marple nodded, her needles never faltering. It was too light for Clara's bold style, but a perfect match for Evelyn's compact. She left it, perhaps by accident, perhaps to point elsewhere, but it betrayed her. And the rose. Poor Mr. Blake's gift, taken from the stage door to muddy the trail. Evelyn thought it would lead us to him, but it only showed her haste. She sighed, a soft sound of regret. She was clever, but cleverness often trips over its own feet. The auditorium door creaked open, and Inspector Craddock stepped in, his broad shoulders slightly stooped from the long night. His notebook was tucked away, his face softened by the relief of a case closed. "Miss Marple," he said, approaching the box, "we've got the manual from Trent's room, marked at the sailor's hitch, just as you thought, and a scrap of emerald silk caught in her hairbrush matches the gown's tier. It's airtight now. She can't talk her way out." He shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "You're a marvel, you know that? Scotland Yard could use you." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained grave. "You're too kind, Inspector. I only see what's there, as I do in St. Mary Mead. People are the same everywhere, greedy, envious, desperate for their moment in the light. Evelyn's moment came at too high a cost. She tucked her knitting into her reticule, her hands steady, as if the act itself sealed the case. "The rose still puzzles me, though," she admitted, her voice soft. "Its petals were bruised, as if crushed. Perhaps she stepped on it in her panic, or perhaps it was placed to tell a story we haven't fully read." Craddock nodded, his brow furrowing. "We traced it to Blake's florist, but it was fresh, not wilted like his others. She must have taken it from the crate, as you said. Doesn't change the case, but it's a loose end." He glanced at Beatrice, then back to Miss Marple. "You're heading back to your village soon, I suppose? This theater's lost its shine for you." Miss Marple smiled, rising from her seat with a sprightliness that belied her years. "Soon, Inspector. My roses need tending, and the village will be buzzing with its own small dramas. But I'll carry this story with me, as I do all of them." She adjusted her shawl, her eyes lingering on the stage, where the curtains seemed to bow in farewell. "The theater is a mirror, Beatrice," she said, turning to her friend. "It shows us who we are, for better or worse. Poor Evelyn saw only her own reflection, and it blinded her." Beatrice rose, her fan snapping shut. "You're a wonder, Jane. I'll never look at a scarf or a rose the same way again." She took Miss Marple's arm, guiding her toward the foyer, where the chandeliers were dimming, their light fading like the last notes of an aria. Craddock followed, his boots echoing in the empty hall. "If you're ever in London again, Miss Marple," he said, "don't come to the theater. You'll have me out of a job." Miss Marple's laugh was soft, like the rustle of leaves in her garden. "I'll stick to my knitting, Inspector, and leave the stage to others. As they stepped into the cool night air, the theater's doors closing behind them, she felt the case settle into place, a finished quilt in her mind. The scarf, the powder, the rose, the knot, all were woven together, their pattern clear at last. Evelyn Trent's ambition had led her to murder, but it was the small things, as always, that had revealed her. And as Miss Marple walked toward the waiting carriage, her thoughts turned to St. Mary Mead, where the roses bloomed and the human heart, with all its flaws, waited to be understood anew.